Oi, what's the best game where you get to eat pie? What's the best game where you play a dead guy? You'll find out in VG247's podcast. Here, what's the best game where you swing from a rope? And what's the best game where you batter the Pope? Assassin's Creed 2. Like I said, you will find out in this here podcast.
Hello and welcome to VG247's Best Games Ever podcast, where we attempt to find the best game within an extremely specific category that we've made up. For example, this week we're looking for the best game that's based on a book that nobody who played it has read. Accepting, of course, that that's meant to be hyperbolic. Please don't write in to tell us how much you love the literary works of Andrzej Sapkowski, because, listen, we're not impressed that you read the book, right? Unless you read it in the original Polish. But not if you're actually Polish, because that would just be patronising. Joining me this week are Editor-in-Chief Tom Ari.
Hello.
Guides writer Kelsey Rayner.
Hello.
And Associate Editor Alex Donaldson.
Hello.
How is everyone doing? Neither of you two complained about the topic as much as Tom has. In fact, well, you guys didn't complain about it at all. But Tom has been bitterly complaining about both of the topics we're recording today, basically, for the entirety of yesterday.
Terrible. They're terrible.
I just knew there were like 3 or 4 picks for this topic that jumped out at me straight away. And I always like a topic like that. So yeah.
I've just picked something that I know is going to lose because I couldn't be asked. Try harder.
All right. Well, can we start with Tom's first then?
Just checking, what was this topic? What was the podcast again? I need to make sure I'm not doing the wrong one.
This is the book one. The book one, Tom. The book one that you hated. Yes, yeah.
So books. So I read this book when I was a young child.
Yeah.
I don't know how youngish. I'm going to say 11. I don't know.
Okay.
10. I don't know. I was an advanced reader, so it's quite a complex book for a child, but I was reading it anyway because I was very smart.
Right.
And I'm sure I'd expect most people are aware that this game is based on this book, but I couldn't find any others that weren't like the obvious choices, so I've just gone with this anyway. But the game itself is a slight curveball.
Yeah.
Because it's also a pretty terrible game for many reasons. So the game is Jurassic Park on the Mega CD. Yeah.
Specifically the Mega CD.
Yes, it's very different. Mega CD version is not like the other versions, right? So, and that, if you're not aware, Jim, Jurassic Park is based on the book Jurassic Park.
By Michael Crichton, yeah. Yeah, I was alive in the 90s, Tom.
I'm not sure if you knew that, but that is the where Jurassic Park came from.
I'll be honest, I didn't know that.
There we go.
So,
Kelsey's learnt something.
I have.
So Jurassic Park is a very
but we're
good
like
book.
15 years older than Kelsey. That's like
very good book that is somewhat, well, quite different from the film.
Yeah.
In many ways, and is certainly like I think probably a lot better than the film. Certainly the second book is a lot better than the second film, which is awful. But anyway, the game Jurassic Park on the Mega CD is kind of like, Mega CD games often had a lot of FMV in them. They were like, because they were on a CD, you could put video on them. So it's kind of like a point and click adventure with some FMV thrown in, which was it was quite a common thing back when that was all that games could do to make themselves look realistic, was like, let's throw FMV in there.
Yeah.
But it's kind of an odd game because lots of the games based on Jurassic Park were basically action games in some form, like you'd shoot some dinosaurs or you'd go around, like the SNES one was like the sort of third isometric-y looking one where you wandered around.
The SNES one had first-person bits as well, didn't it?
I think it did, yeah. And the Mega Drive one was bloody awful. You played as either the Raptor or Hammond, I think it was. It was terrible. I remember being given it by someone who worked in a pub. I was like,
why are you always like given games by people associated with pubs?
I spent a lot of time in pubs as a child. I lived above a pub for a while.
Just invites more questions. Like the more you peel the onion, it just keeps going.
But anyway, the Mega Drive version was shit. The SNES one actually was pretty good, but I only played a kind of version of that. I think the Game Boy version, possibly, which is sort of based on the SNES one. I think years later, when I got a Game Boy, way after the Game Boy was a thing. And that was quite a good game, actually. But anyway, the Mega CD one, which completely different. And because I had a Mega CD, because I very a very bad decision to spend all my life savings on a Mega CD.
Yeah.
Bad. That's what happens when you're really into like Sega as a child, and then it goes wrong. So yeah,
I know that feel.
So me and my brother bought as much as we could afford, basically, by trading stuff in. Mega, and obviously Jurassic Park was a big deal. We got this, and it's kind of like you just go around the island, and you have to find eggs. I think you have to find eggs for like a number of dinosaurs. But the bizarre thing about it really is that it's got this point and click stuff, and you do like the classic use the pliers on the wire or whatever, or put the thing in the thing, and you wander around. But then there's this bits where you put CDs into these like CD player stations, which are just randomly located around this island, and then some random dude will talk to you about the dinosaur for a bit. So it's kind of like almost a bit in Cartery, another dated reference there. And Carter.
I mean, CD-ROM was like the medium for edutainment, right? That was the big thing back then.
So it was
Wasn't Goldblum in this game?
I can't remember.
I'm pretty sure he's in it. Like I think he's in the credits where I feel certain the credits are him just sort of talking about, Megan, you're going to be
doing his Jeff Goldblum thing that he does.
I'm certain. I've got a, unless it was like a Saturn version or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, I remember thinking this game it was obviously like stills mostly, but I remember thinking it looked great, and the way you could walk around the island looked really, really incredible. I watched a YouTube video of it this morning. No, it does not look great. It looks pixelated as shit. It's terrible. So there we go. That's my choice.
So what he's saying is that you've submitted a shit game.
Well, I think it has a place in history as a game that's a bit different to all the other games. It's probably more interesting than all these other games that are going to be picked. Let's be fair. What is it? Is it The Witcher? Is it Stalker?
I just had to check what I just said. So it was actually it was the PlayStation and Saturn game that Goldblum was in.
Okay, yeah, because they would have had the budget for it, and nobody's spending money on the Mega CD.
Which, as I recall, that game was shockingly shit.
So I think it's quite interesting, Tom, that you just reeled off like 3 very prominent Eastern European games based on obscure books, but nobody's picked any of them. But that's quite an interesting trend, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, but actually you're wrong, because the next one actually is quite interesting, and I had no idea that it was based on a book. Kelsey, what is it you've got for us?
So, best game based on a book that's nobody read. Wait, let me say that again. Best game based on a book that nobody has read has to be The Binding of Isaac, which is based on the Bible. So the biblical story, I'll start with that. The biblical story of The Binding of Isaac is when God asks Abraham to sacrifice his son. He doesn't sacrifice his son in the end, he sacrifices some sort of goat instead. But anyway, so Binding of Isaac kind of loosely takes that and is around a child called Isaac, who, funnily enough, uses his tears as projectiles, which is great, as his mum is sort of asked by God to essentially sacrifice him, which leads to Isaac going into the basement, which is our dungeon, and then we have this dungeon crawler game with roguelike elements that is fantastic. So,
when you said it, I thought, is it based on like a really obscure, like, Aleister Crowley sort of book? Like from, I didn't realize it was just like, oh no, literally the Bible.
Yeah, so there's background to it. In the creator was born into a Catholic family who became like born again Christians. Yeah, and there was a lot of conflicts of interest there between him and his family. So that is how the game actually came about, which is interesting in itself.
Just what's the name of this topic, Jim? Just to be clear, what's the full name of the top of the podcast?
Well, hang on. If you're going to go down this path, I'm telling you, you've gone wrong already, because the topic is best game that is based on a book that nobody has read. But you picked a shit game.
I'm not saying I'm going to win. I'm just saying that how many people do we think have read parts of the Bible?
Right. Also, what I would say as well is that Jurassic Park, the fucking Mega CD game, is based on the film Jurassic Park, which is based on the book.
Yeah, but look, Jurassic Park, popular book, right? But I bet far fewer people have read that than they have the Bible.
Right. No, but listen to this. How many people do you know that have sat there and read the Bible back to front as they would a novel? How many people do you know that don't just pluck passages from the Bible here and there?
What people
Nobody.
do in their own homes is their business. I mean, I don't get involved.
Absolutely nobody. And
Exactly.
I know one vicar. Well, it says he's a vicar.
And there's probably
He's just
plenty of
on
people
telly.
who have played Binding of Isaac that have definitely not touched the Bible.
That's almost certainly true. But
Yeah, well, exactly. So
that's
there we
not
go.
the name of this topic, is it? It's not.
Yeah, but the topic's meant to be slightly vague, Tom, and then you have an argument about it. That's how it works.
That's what I'm arguing about it, Jim.
The game, is it or is it not based on a book?
It is.
It is, yeah.
Apparently. I mean, we're going on what you're saying, Kelsey. I haven't looked into this myself.
How does the Bible manifest in the game?
The main things that I've noticed is obviously he goes through and fights these different bosses, and obviously he's upset by the whole situation, which is why his tears are the projectiles. So it's kind of equal parts like weirdly charming, but also like this is so sad. I'm pretty sure there is a bit towards the end where his mum becomes more involved, and obviously the mum is meant to kind of be symbolic of Abraham. I think that's as far as it goes. I think there's more in the prequel game.
Not heavily based on the Bible, then, from the sound of things.
Loosely
Just sort of-
based counts.
Loosely. Yeah,
Loosely.
but the story of Isaac is the biblical story. Just
I've never played it. I can't comment. My only knowledge of the Bible is that I was given one as a child
yeah.
Once again,
that's
you just,
it.
people just distributing stuff to
from an uncle. But I guess he just slapped 20 quid on the front of it, taped it on, and that's what I remember
honestly-
about the Bible is that I got 20 quid and a Bible.
I honestly thought you were going to say that you were given a Bible by a man in a pub then.
No, not that time.
Bring it all
His uncle
full
was in the
circle.
pub at the time.
He did used to clean pubs.
Well, that counts.
Right. Okay, so The Binding of Isaac, loosely based on the Bible. We've got Jurassic Park, which is
Very much heavily based on
the Jurassic
book.
Park, the game, which is loosely based on the film that's loosely based on the novel
That says you,
that
but yes.
millions of people read. Alex, what have you got for us? Because I had no idea this was based on a book either.
So I decided to, as Tom said, there's so many obvious options. And so I was like, well, screw that. Let's try and find something that most people don't even realise, like you say, is based on a book. And there was one game that came to my mind immediately. And of course it did, because it's me. And it is a 90s Square classic, Parasite Eve. So this is a horror game, action RPG horror game, which we'll come to that bit. But yeah, so this game, this series, I'm picking the first game in the series because it's the best one. But this series, there's 3 of them so far, and rumor has it there is going to be a new one recently that's been sort of mooted a little bit. But it's based on a 1995 Japanese like sci-fi horror novel by an author called Hideaki Senna. And it has been released in the West. It has been translated and released. It's part of that lineup of fairly iconic Japanese books that got translated over, probably in part due to the success of the games, a bit like how Battle Royale got translated because of the film. But despite that, a lot of people are still blissfully unaware that this is a book. Most people haven't read it. The game and the book, it's more that the game takes the core concepts of the book, so it's not adapting the direct story of the book, but sort of the nature of the horror elements, and it being all about like DNA and all that sort of creepy, freaky stuff is all from the book. The game's a little lighter than the book, I would say. The book is heavier on the science. It's heavier on like lots of like weird childbirth stuff and things like that. They don't have all that in the game, but it's a really good horror novel. And yeah, and so I don't quite the story of how this was made. I'm pretty sure that either or one of the two, Hironobu Sakaguchi or Takashi Tokita, who are both important Final Fantasy figures, read the book at some stage, and they'd always had designs on setting a game in New York, which the novel is not. The novel's set in Japan. And so they sort of meshed those two ideas, and you end up with this really interesting, unique game. But the thing I find fascinating about it, as well as it being based on this novel, and actually, initially, I should say, originally in development, this was going to be a sequel to the novel, and then it changed into its own version and adaptation of that story. But the thing I find really interesting is this is Square at like its most interesting, and this is where I think this game slots nicely into the best element of this podcast, where this was when Square was just like, we're going to, off the back of the huge success of Final Fantasy VII, we're going to try making everything. So they were like, we're going to make a fighting game, and they partnered with Namco and made Air G's, which was like their Tekken style thing that also had some Final Fantasy characters in it. And this was totally them looking at the success of Resident Evil and going, let's make a horror game. Except the one little tweak and twist on that with not with all, but with most of these games that Square made back then, is they still wanted to be seen as a role-playing game developer. So whatever game they made, when they made Racing Lagoon, a racing game, it was a racing RPG. And when they made this, it's a horror action RPG. So it's sort of got all those RPG hooks, but it's got the Resi style scares and all that sort of stuff. It straight up has a version of although it's real-time combat, it's pausable, and it's basically a twisted version of the active time battle system from Final Fantasy 4, 5, 6, 7. And yeah, it's a really good, really interesting, really cool game. It was Square's first ever game that was rated M for mature. They never made violent, bloody, gross games until this, and they haven't made that many since, really.
Is it? So it's not their only M-rated game, but
it's not. And I'm pretty convinced that Final Fantasy 16, when it comes out next year, will be an M, for instance, because I think they want to go after that Witcher audience. But this was the first. At this point, Square had existed for 25 years or something like that.
Yeah.
And maybe not quite that long, maybe more like 15, but at this point Square had existed for over a decade, and they'd never released an M-rated game. This was the first one. And lots of other interesting little things about it. It was, because it was set in New York, they actually set up a satellite studio in America, and so about half the development staff were actually in America, so they could have a bit of authenticity to the Americanisms and Westernisms in the game. And then, it was successful, and they did a sequel, which was okay. Music by Yoko Shimomura, who is brilliant. And then they did a third game, which is fucking terrible, and everyone likes a PSP game, and everyone likes to pretend it doesn't exist. But yeah, it's based on a novel of the same name.
There we go.
And the book author was a little bit, he was like vaguely involved, but the interesting thing is it was more between Square and the publisher, so he didn't find out the story of the game literally until he
did the author hate it?
I think he enjoyed it, to be honest. I've never seen comment that he despised it or anything like that. I've seen some interviews with him and stuff like that, and he's only ever spoken like in a positive way about it. But yeah, it's an interesting game. It's an interesting horror story. Like, anyone who's a horror aficionado, I highly recommend the original book. But the game's also pretty interesting too, and it's sort of
the original book is expensive.
Yes.
Have you read it, Kelsey?
No, I want to, but expensive.
Yeah.
And I'm one of those people where I'm like adamant that I want a physical copy to read something.
Are we talking like hundreds?
160.
Jeez.
Is the first one that's come up. And that's not even a first edition.
Wow.
So
we've got three really good contenders there, because and I'd say once again, none of the obvious choices have been picked. I mean, even Tom's choice wasn't that obvious.
It's just, it's a very obvious book, but the game maybe isn't.
Yeah, I
quite like Alex's story there. It's quite a good little story. He always knows what he's talking about, whereas I come on here having Googled something for 5 minutes, and he actually knows.
Yeah, because you pad it out with a story about guys giving you fucking DVDs in pubs or whatever. All right, well, I've got to pick something now, so it's time to have that argument. God, once again, right? First of all, I would say Kelsey, the last time you were on, you picked The Sims for a God game topic.
Yeah.
Which I thought was genius and left field and thinking out the box. This is also the same. Tom, you said, I mean, at one point in your kind of pitch for it, you pivoted to, yeah, but I did look it up and it looks shit now.
Yeah,
so,
I mean, that is true. But then Parasite Eve, I mean, is that good still now? Is it really?
I think it's all right, and I think it's interesting
really,
because this is what I was getting at when I talked about it, right? It's still really interesting, this mix of role playing and horror, and it was this really creative. Like you look at Square's got a lot of games out right now, but it is like here's a strategy RPG and a traditional turn-based RPG and an action RPG and a modern RPG and something that's trying to be Assassin's Creed, and it's all that stuff's fine. But it was that really interesting time for them where they kept making games that were like, right, let's take a successful thing, in this case Resident Evil, and let's try and do it, but do it in a very Square way. And I still rate Parasite Eve, and there's still a copy behind me somewhere.
I just want to throw this out there as,
right.
as a thing, right? I've got COVID at the moment. Does that count for anything?
No. Jurassic Park, the Mega CD game, the difference between Alex's Parasite Eve pitch and your Jurassic Park pitch is that Alex didn't sort of lose confidence in his own pitch halfway through.
I never had confidence in it. So I was always...
Yeah, but you were talking a good game at first, and then you were like, yeah, but then I Googled it, and it's a bit rubbish.
If you were a kid... I've got fond memories of it, even though I acknowledge that it is not good.
My main issue with this remained that it's actually not really... I mean, it is, technically speaking, based on a book. But
you have to take a few leaps to get
It's based on a
there.
film, which is based on a book. It's like me picking GoldenEye or From Russia with Love, both of which are great games.
Yeah.
But it's like saying because the first Mass Effect prequel novel technically came out before the games, even though it was written after the games. Good books, by the way.
I have to say, if you had
That's
picked...
not the same. Jurassic
Alex,
Park
if you
is
had
definitely based on a book.
If you had picked 007 Nightfire for this topic, I would have laughed for 20 minutes and given you the win.
I reckon Jurassic Park, the game, Mega CD game, is more closely based on the book than any of the other choices here. Even though it is not very closely based on the book.
I would definitely disagree.
I would argue against that for
Eve.
Parasite Eve, yeah.
Yeah, it's a different character.
This is what I'm leaning toward, right? And they're all really good choices, and the only sort of real differentiator between them is how close they are to the source material. Based entirely on your pitches, because I've got to be honest, I haven't played any of these games, and I only know about them just sort of via osmosis. But I would say, assuming Alex hasn't lied...
Yeah, it is true.
Parasite Eve sounds like it's the one that's most inspired by the source material. Like you said, there were changes and everything, but they took the core concepts and
it
essentially...
is still absolutely about pregnancy and like imagine what if you're carrying a demon.
You know what Jurassic Park's
sort of
about?
stuff.
You know what Jurassic Park's about, Jim?
Dinosaurs.
The one that's not about a park for dinosaurs, yeah?
Yeah.
That is exactly what the game is about.
It does have
the movie and the book.
It is the only one about it is the only one this week that isn't like something about horrific to do with childbirth as well. So that's it's got that going for it. It's weird how two of those came up in the same week. But all right, I have to pick something now. I'm going to give it to Alex just purely because it sounds like the other two feel like they are more steps removed from the source material. That's all, because Jurassic Park goes via a film adaptation of the book, and it's a Mega CD game as well, so it's inherently terrible, obviously. And Binding of Isaac obviously takes inspiration from the Bible, and certain characters have parallels with the Bible. But I feel like it's way looser than Parasite Eve. What it sounds like is more of a direct adaptation of at least the core themes. So I'm going to give it to Parasite Eve.
I think that's well deserved.
I feel like
I don't agree that it is. Just if you're listening to this and you think that Jurassic Park the game about a park full of dinosaurs, Jurassic Park, which
you yourself said was bad.
Exactly the concept of the book, a park about dinosaurs, right? How is that a mass departure from what the book is?
It's not, because the game's an adaptation of the film with Jeff Goldblum. Jeff Goldblum's not in the book.
He's not in the game, I don't think.
He's in one of the games. We had this argument earlier.
This is just like, I don't know.
Like I said, you will find out in this here podcast.
If you enjoyed the show, please give us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcast. It really helps us get the word out. We're not just a podcast, of course. If you'd like to hear more from the team, then check out VG247.com for our fantastic news coverage, features, reviews, and game guides. Thank you so much for listening. Goodbye.